So hi, everyone. We are here today recording the first episode of YPO Latam Impact Stories. And I'm very proud here to be with Luis Gallo and Mauricio Camargo from Colombia. Luis is probably one of the pioneers in impact in Latin America. He has built an amazing story that he will share with us today. Mauricio has helped him throughout that journey and now is leading the efforts in Compartamos con Colombia. So Luis, please introduce yourself to everyone and give us a long introduction and tell us the story of this amazing achievement that you, and I'm sure helped by a lot of people, have done in Colombia.
Well, first of all, Paulo, thank you very much for this invitation. Mauricio and I are very excited because, we do like to work in alliance with other players in this very, very demanding sector of impact. So we're very glad to have this opportunity to share what we have been doing in Colombia. And basically, the story starts that, the fact that I was born not in Colombia, I was born in New York, but that was an accident. And I came to Colombia as a very, very young baby. This is the country where I grew up. I finished high school. And, I consider myself a very fortunate Colombian because I was able to study abroad. I went to college at Georgetown University in Washington. And then I was also very fortunate to work at a leading bank in New York, JP Morgan. This was starting in 1982. And it was not called JP Morgan, it was called Morgan Guaranty Trust Company. But in essence, I learned my profession at that place, which is to be an investment banker. That's what I've done all my life on the professional front. And it's important to mention this because fairly early in my career, when I was just a year out of the training program, and I was 24 years old, I came up with the idea of trying to figure a way of giving back. I visualized that in investment banking, if you do things right, eventually the economic needs would be satisfied. But I also felt a very strong desire, first of all, to come back to my country, to establish my own investment banking firm. And by the age of 35, I was 24 at that time, but the age of 35, I hoped that I could spend half my time making money and practicing investment banking, and the other half of my time giving back. And the essence of giving back was a theory or a hypothesis that one could transfer knowledge, managerial knowledge, from the business world to the social world, to the social sector, especially to NGOs and to nonprofits. And that in many ways, the best practices in business could be applied successfully in nonprofit entities to make them more effective, more efficient, better funded, etc. So, just to finish this introductory part, you put those type of dreams in your nightstand, and you open it sometime later in life, and you ask yourself, how are you doing with respect to your younger dreams? And that's how I started thinking of Compartamos, and we'll be glad to let you know how it's been evolving and where it is today. So that's kind of the introduction, Paulo.
Great. Before we go to Mauricio, can you share a little bit beyond Compartamos? Because you did so much more than Compartamos, and you were also a pioneer impact investor, if I remember correctly, since like early 2000s, you were doing for-profit impact investment. Maybe share with us a little bit about that broader scope beyond Compartamos con Colombia.
Well, at some point, and obviously I don't remember the exact year, but it was, sometime in the mid-90s, I started thinking, why do we need to only donate money to generate impact? Why can't we invest money in ways that could truly generate impact? And, that's not such a creative idea. I mean, I think many people have thought about that, over even centuries, or at least decades, but the term was not established.
But Luis, sorry to interrupt you. How was that for you so early? That was a big mystery for me because I became an impact entrepreneur, but the concept was very mature. But did you hear from someone else, or was it really like an organic idea based on your philanthropic experience, or did someone inspire you, or some project that you saw inspired you?
Well, it was not only me. I mean, by the time we started doing impact investing, which we used to call profitable social investing, for lack of a better term, Compartamos was already in operation. And as we'll explain in a little while, we had a pool of talent in that entity that was very unique. So those conversations, with Mauricio's former boss, guy named Luis Andrade, with other people, kind of led us to the idea that we could access resources and funding from international corporation and start promoting investments among very vulnerable societies or communities in Colombia, and at the same time in very difficult regions. Let's remember that at the turn of the century, around 1998, 99, 2000, Colombia made its attempt to reach a peace agreement with the FARC guerrillas, but that attempt was, failed around 2001. And at that time, we had a huge increase in kidnappings. There was a year, maybe 2000, in which we had 3,500 kidnappings in Colombia.
Wow.
That's about 10 a day. And in many ways, this was a failed country. Many people were talking, saying that Colombia was a failed society, that, the drug business had become way too powerful. And many people were leaving Colombia. Many qualified, wealthy Colombians were going to live in the US or in Canada or in Costa Rica, or at least in Panama. And some of us decided to stay here, even though we had the option of leaving, but we decided to stay here and do something. And, within that framework, one of the options was to channel international cooperation, not in donation only, but in investment as well. So we started working with a couple of entities like the International Organization of Migrations, which was an operator of USAID and the Colombian plan. And those ideas, started surfacing. At the same time, obviously, we researched what was going on around the world. And we discovered very early on a gentleman in England called Sir Richard Cohen, which I'm sure you've heard of. His foundation, Bridges, his project called the Social Investment Bank, which created a big fund, basically accessing the monies that were left behind in checking accounts, and people had forgotten. So all of those ideas kind of inspired us, or maybe modestly we inspired them a little bit because we started interacting, and we invited the second person.
Did you meet Sir Cohen? Did you meet Sir Richard Cohen?
I have met him a couple of times, but much later in life. We invited.
For those who don't know, he's probably one of the fathers of what is now called impact investing. He was one of the first voices to yes, let's say, more aggressively talk about that. But sorry, please continue.
Yeah, and there was another gentleman called Jet Emerson, who was also inspiring, but he was from the US. But going back to Sir Richard Cohen, we invited his second person, his executive director of Bridges, to come to Colombia and give a conference on impact investing. And we realized that we were doing very much the same thing. So that's kind of how it started in the early times. The other piece that I didn't mention, when I did my MBA at Harvard Business School, I met a professor called Jim Austin, and another professor, which I don't remember his name. He is half Chinese, half Uruguayan, and they were pushing the envelope in those type of ideas back then. So, keeping in touch with them also helped.
I loved what you said. I have two more questions, and then we'll pass on to Mauricio. But I love what you said about deciding not to give up and stay and try to fix the problem. I think a lot of Latin Americans connect with that, and maybe other people in the world as well. Many countries sometimes go through that, and people and YPOers are in that special place and tough decision of either I leave or sometimes I have to leave, or either I stay and try to be part of the solution. So thank you for that. And Colombia did come back, right? So good job in being an important part of that.
It was not
I
because of
have two
us,
more
but anyway.
questions. The one is, so if I understand correctly, you were an investment banker, and at some point in time, you kind of had to become an investment banker for the good, right? Investment bankers typically have to be very annoying and call a lot of people to get into deals, to have meetings, and to get in there, right? And how was that for you, to also have to call people to ask them for money for philanthropic projects, right? I mean, is that something that you felt as a sacrifice, where you were spending ammunition for a philanthropic purpose? Or did that somehow connect very well with what you did, and actually even help you as an investment banker? Did you feel like this was something that you were probably burning a little bit your relationships to get something done in terms of impact? Or can you say that it has actually helped you also on your business side of your life, in strengthening connections and belonging together to something larger? What can you share about that?
Well, I think it has helped more than it has hurt, but that came later. I think I need to explain a little bit, how Compartamos came about and what it does. And, this idea of when I was 24 years old of having two offices, fortunately evolved into a more sophisticated concept of creating an entity and not doing it on my own or with my own company, but inviting other colleagues, what we call technically professional service firms. Professional service firms are those companies that basically transfer knowledge and offer expert time to clients, and they get paid for that. So there you have law firms, you have consulting firms, strategic consulting firms, and all types of consulting firms. You obviously have investment banks, you have auditing companies, the Price Waterhouses and the Pitt Marwicks of the world. You have headhunters, you have advertising companies, you have rating companies. There's a broad spectrum of professional service firms, and the effort to which you refer really centered on bringing those companies on board. In 2000, perhaps one of the most difficult years in Colombia, if not the most difficult year in our recent history, we contacted about 30 companies in those different sectors that I mentioned. And by the end of 2000, we were able to commit 12 of those 30 companies to be part of Compartamos con Colombia. We have eventually increased the number to about 16, but we have never been more than 20. And we don't want to be more than 20 because it becomes difficult to manage. But what's really important is that the brain trust, the resources, the number of professionals that we were able to bring together, it's quite unique. I mean,
if I understood correctly, those are competitors working together.
Yes, in many ways, competitors, but in also many ways, collaborators. Many times an investment bank does something when McKinsey has done something before, or McKinsey comes later and fixes what the investment bank didn't do right. So there's a lot of collaboration, but it was really funny because in those days, we started Compartamos in January of 2001, and we would have a monthly meeting in which the managing partners of the member firms would come and spend 2 hours. We would meet from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. It was not 9:05, it was not 9:10. At 9 a.m., we would all rush out the door to try to get the deal that the other guy was trying to get from us. So it was really funny because in some cases, we actually were part of transactions in which we were working, as counterparts to firms that were part of Compartamos. There were 4 investment banks in Compartamos, and we had some, tough negotiations. But in those 2 hours, once a month, we all, shared, which is what Compartamos means in Spanish, and we all worked together. And it was really, really amazing how we got along. The professionals of our firms also, got along, and that's really significant. We have estimates that in these 22 years, easily more than 4,000 professionals of the, 15 or 16 firms have, committed significant pro bono time to the Compartamos projects.
Wow, that is impressive. That is unique. Mobilizing 4,000 highly qualified professionals. And that's how Mauricio got involved, right? Mauricio, introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your journey with Compartamos.
Paulo, pleasure to be here, share a little bit of our experience. Just for context, Luis has always been sort of the reference, as you mentioned, and very inspiring figure in the market. I had the fortune to meet him, having met him in the early days. I started core of my professional activity here in Colombia with McKinsey, and McKinsey was one of the lead sponsors of Compartamos. I was a younger partner at the time, and the managing partner asked me to be the point person for the project. So I became very much involved in the early days and was part of a significant number of these meetings that we've made reference to, trying to obviously make the link between the Compartamos organization and our consultants and getting this embedded in our value proposition to members. And most of all, I think join forces for a better Colombia. That was really the true north that was motivating for us. Yeah.
What did it mean to you as a young, I imagine you were 20 something when you probably started getting involved with Compartamos. What did it mean for you? What was the take home for you personally, Mauricio, at that time?
This was probably late 20s. For me, it was a great opportunity again to give back. I think, many of us, in particular in Colombia, have, been raised in privilege, have a strong yearning to give back. And then suddenly I was there in a position to be able to do it with the support of very large organizations, which gave us immense leverage. And that's part of the beauty of the program. One thing is, 3 guys getting together to try to move a project like this forward. But another thing is, each one of them having, Deloitte behind and McKinsey behind and leading investment bankers behind. It's very different. And
if I understand correctly, Compartamos was a small YPO, right? I mean, it was everybody in the investment banking, auditing, everybody that was doing deals in Colombia was working together and in meetings together. So it was a kind of a YPO of that capital markets, right?
No, there was an element of that, I think, in the mind of Luis and the other sort of guys that gave this form. There was obviously there was worth in participating, right?
Yeah.
And to be honest, in those early days, I mean, again, I was there probably 29, 30, interacting with the managing partners of all the leading firms in Colombia for a great purpose. And that just created huge energy, for me personally.
Yeah.
I left McKinsey in 2005, and hence I basically is associated from Compartamos for quite some time. Obviously, always sort of tracked its progress. We actually, and I moved into private equity where I've been for close to 17 years. Actually have hired people that were trained in Compartamos that then moved to MBAs and whatnot and became part of our firm. People with whom we share, same core values and way of doing things, because Compartamos has also been a great training ground for Colombian professionals with a social dimension. But I come back to the organization about 3 years ago when Luis and the board at the time invited me as an independent director. I was obviously very happy to come back to the organization, and that presence led into me being asked basically to take the chairman position of the organization, which is what I do today.
Very good.
Part of my time.
Very good. What I love about this story is that I think a lot of this impact transition in the world is just a change of mindset from the do good by doing well, where people used to now first have a cycle of success and become very, very successful. And then when they retire, do good. What I like a little bit about this story is that I see an element of doing well by doing good as well, right? Where you don't wait retirement to do good. You just try to do good as you do well, and very involved and ingrained with your professional life. So I think this is definitely a great inspirational story for those YPOers that sometimes delay those philanthropic initiatives or impact initiatives to a later moment when they can do something now, just as part of their professional ecosystem, right? Luis.
Paulo, let me add just briefly one comment, which is something that we talk a lot with Luis, and it's the dimension of leverage, and I want to make emphasis on that. Of course, when you're 65 and wealthy, you can do a lot of philanthropic work, but I think the leverage that you have being an active professional, with all of your networks fully active, all your interactions, with full energy, give you, without having to execute yourself, probably the possibility to mobilize in ways that once you are sort of in the later stage of your career, you can only do with money. And I think what the world needs more than money right now is the energy and the intention. And that I
yes.
think it's that's why we're
very well said.
Also very motivated in terms of what YPO can bring to the impact community.
Very good. Luis, I need to ask you something. So one thing that I'm always very concerned is that I see that a lot of people still think that impact is very conceptual, that all that we're talking about is very idealistic and conceptual. So I always try to be very concrete. So can you share maybe the project within Compartamos con Colombia that you are most proud of these 22 years? I know that there's a new exciting project that I'll ask Mauricio to talk about, but maybe talk about some of the earlier ones or the initial ones, and tell us a little bit about that project. And then I'll ask you to tell us about maybe one for-profit impact investing that you did as well. But let's do one and then the other.
Yes, and I also must remember to tell you how my forum had a big role in the existence of Compartamos. That we cannot
say their
forget.
names. It's important to say the names of people that.
What happened with the forum, and I'm extremely grateful to YPO. I joined YPO in 2000, at the same time that I was promoting this idea. And at one point, I asked my forum for a presentation about the Compartamos idea. It had been in the doing for a couple of years. There was a business plan and a PowerPoint presentation. So I shared that with my forum, and without breaking confidentiality, what really shocked me and impressed me is that the following day, obviously in the forum, everybody was very excited, but the following day, two members of my forum called me on their own, and they said, Luis, we want to help you, put this idea in practice. And those two people really made a difference, because many times in life and before I answer your specific questions, I'm a strong believer that people in life, successful people in life with whom, Mauricio has worked both in McKinsey and in private equity, and in which I tend to work in my investment banking practice, which I have not abandoned. This is not one instead of the other. People of that profile tend to have three key objectives in life. They have the business or the professional objective, which tends to, demand most time and most energy, unless you happen to be very successful, very young, and you sell your company and then you decide to do good. That's one route. But in general, when you meet CEOs, CFOs, members of boards or wealthy families, the business side is overwhelming. Then there's a second objective, which is the family and the personal aspect, which you try to balance always. It's a big dilemma because, if you're doing a lot of work, you take time away from family and personal life and, exercise and whatnot. And if you have less work, you tend to give a little bit more time to family. But it's always a conflict. You're trying to, balance your 16 hours a day between those two objectives. And then there's a third objective that tends to appear later in life, but now in the present generations, it's much more present early on, which is the impact objective. There's a very famous YPO inspired book called From Success to Significance. And there's a big difference between success and significance. We cannot translate that in Spanish too easily, but people tend to want to do something more than just make money or be important or have a big company, etc. What's really difficult is how do you balance those three objectives? Because two are demanding enough. And if you introduce a third, it becomes much more complex. And there are many ways in which people, leaders and successful persons deal with that. The easiest way is to postpone impact, to say, that's something I'm going to do when I'm much wealthier, or when I'm much older, or when I, get sick, or whatever, or when I retire. The challenging way is to do it the younger you are. I hope I could have started not at 37, but at 27. If I had been able to start, getting involved in the social sector and in the impact sector 10 years earlier, I would have known much more, and I would have probably been more efficient in the latter years of my life. So I really believe that it is possible to do the three things, to balance life between those three things, but it needs two things. It needs structure and it needs discipline. If you want to spend half your productive time, like I started doing in 2000, and I keep doing that, without abandoning your business, and at the same time raising or having three kids and all the other implications that brings along, it just cannot be an accident. You have to think about it, and you have to figure intelligent ways of structuring your business, delegating, bringing people that are better than you, buying in your wife and your kids into this, and working with great people on the impact sector. So that's something that I feel very strongly. And again, I'm very thankful.
Very well said. Very well put. Thank you for that.
Because if not, it's just a dream. It would have been a beautiful dream, but it would not exist. Now, going back to your question, in the Compartamos front, there are many projects that have started significant impact. Sometimes we start the fire and it becomes a huge fire over time, but it's not us really that do it. It's the people that we empower, the people that we help in capacity building, the people that we bring together, to work jointly. Perhaps, over time, the one that I'm particularly happy about is the macro social housing projects of the Santo Domingo Foundation, because in two cities of Colombia, which are very demanding, Cartagena and Barranquilla. Cartagena, it's a beautiful city, and you were there, Paulo, and you loved it. But it's also where most, poor indicators exist. So how do you raise people out of poverty? And one way is to provide housing. And the idea is that in about 10 more years or 15 more years, this foundation will have built about 60,000 social impact or social housing for very poor people in those two cities. So that's just one example. It's important to mention that Compartamos, in its 22 years, has completed about 800 mandates, projects that have a beginning
800.
and an
Wow.
end. Of those 800, and maybe we may be wrong, it may be 700, it may be 900, but it's a lot of hundreds. We probably have helped more than 400 foundations, different foundations, and we probably have worked with about 500 mandates in foundations, because we do repeat with many foundations, and that also includes 200 companies that we have helped in corporate social responsibility, in shared value, in ESG, in sustainability, and about 30 to 50 high net worth families in making more effective their philanthropic objectives. So it's really significant in that respect.
Absolutely. And tell us a little bit about the for-profit. Tell us the story of one company that you invested or helped create that was a for-profit social or environmental impact initiative.
The idea of impact investment, I guess, really began in looking at microcredit entities. There were several microcredit entities with which we worked in the early 2000s.
I love those models. It's one of the easiest way to have impact in emerging markets, because
yes, they're fantastic, but they have one basic problem, which is that they do not really take people out of poverty. They take people out of misery, which is different.
Mm-hmm.
And in those 4 cases, I kept asking, show me one borrower that really has made it into the middle class of Colombia. And none came about. And then I started asking, why is that? And it's because many times the microcredit borrowers fall into a lending trap because they become too big for the microcredit entity and they are too small for the established banks. So along that time, one of the members of Compartamos came to us and said, I want to do a project in Medellin that generates employment. And I have $1 million to fund that project. So we started mounting ideas, and we said, why don't we work with this very effective microcredit entity called, I'll remember the name in a minute. And that microcredit entity worked in the most poor favela in Medellin. And instead of lending, we said, why don't we do microequity? Why don't we invest money in $5,000 to $10,000 amounts in family companies, small mom and pop shops, and we made 50 investments in that community.
Wow, that's amazing. I do that in Brazil as well, and through Invest Favela, we've done 10 investments, and it's transformational. But tell us more.
Yeah,
tell us
it's
more.
incredible because it's a different mind frame if you borrow versus if you get equity.
And sometimes people feel very proud that you're actually being an equity investor and not another loan shark. It's the emotional effect you have these entrepreneurs that they are receiving equity investment is very it's very impactful.
So that evolved, not to make the answer too long, into a bigger fund, because this same gentleman came back a couple years later and said, why don't we do something that is on a national scale, that is not, limited to a comuna in Medellin? And that's how Inversor came about, which is the first impact investment fund in Colombia. And that, coincides with the fact that, serving people, in the decade of 2000 to 2010, when we observed someone like Paulo Batista participating in a nonprofit board, and I don't intend to offend anyone, you would normally see Paulo arriving late and leaving early and very busy with his cell phone, but not as focused as he would be in the same day if he were to attend his company board meeting where his money was invested. So we started asking, if we bring investors to impact, beyond money, what comes with them? Or, and a lot of things come: commitment, knowledge, additional resources, and one fundamental difference: if a nonprofit goes bankrupt, it doesn't hurt so much. If an impact investment project goes bankrupt, your reputation and your credibility is at stake. So those differences we find are quite useful.
I love that. And what can you share about Inversor? How successful is it? How in terms of business fundamentals, does it has to make a trade-off between returns and impact, which is fine, it's part of impact investing, or is it satisfactorily profitable?
It's more the latter than the first. We measure success in Inversor on a couple of ways. First, it was the first example or the first experiment, even before the concept of impact investment came around. The term was coined in September of 2009 by Brooks Labine of the Rockefeller Foundation and Jet Emerson in what then was called the Global Investment Impact Network, Guinea. And I remember the exact day because obviously I said, wow, what a wonderful name. This is what we needed. But Inversor started before that. We have been successful in that the 5 investments we've made, none have gone broke. A couple of them have been close to bankruptcy, but we have saved them.
That's amazing.
And typically you do find mortality rates higher than that. We have exited from 2 of them, which is also quite good, but we have not exited from the 2 bigger ones, which will provide the returns that we calculate in paper. And those returns are not that bad. They are maybe 5 to 7% above inflation, which is quite decent for impact investing. So the biggest challenge is to exit. It's difficult to find the right target.
Because the ecosystem is not mature. So you can't just exit to a later stage fund. You have to carry them all the way through.
Yes, you can sell them in some cases, not easy, but in most cases they have to reacquire your equity, which is not easy also. So
a lot of, at least in Brazil, I see a lot of companies now wanting to have in their corporate venture capitals, wanting to have environmental or social impact initiatives that are somehow related to their ESG strategy and their business. So that's starting to change, but it is a structural issue in any early stage ecosystem, right? And but I think it's evolving. And Mauricio, share us a little bit more about what's going on now at Compartamos. I know that you have a massive project around the amazing parks of Colombia. So share with us a little bit about that, and how are you looking at structuring that?
Compartamos, I think, is in a great position today. It's been running strong. Last year, we had our highest income or revenue year. We executed something like 45 projects through the year and involved about 400 professionals from the different firms. We are, I think, at a very interesting cross-section where obviously all this impact efforts work on sustainability goals, and a significant conscience in the north that impact has to happen in the south. And in the south, it's countries like Colombia, it's countries like Brazil. And when people want to execute here, they need a trusted partner. And Compartamos is becoming that trusted partner, basically to support international investors coming in. And it is sort of a stamp of quality and trust in that process. Out of that, we're having dialogues with very large international foundations wanting to execute in Colombia through Compartamos or supported by Compartamos. And that has enabled us, for example, to reach a multi-year agreement with 4 foundations to support community-based impact ventures throughout the country initially. And that's going to be an effort that's going to be extended into Peru, into Venezuela over the coming years. And it's really amazing. It's helping us get to the furthest corners of the country to support community-based organizations in a comprehensive strengthening of these entities. So strategic, legal, HR processes. And I think that it's at the core of the organization of what we have been doing so far. We also envision a very significant step up in involvement with corporates. As you have mentioned, there's more conscience every day in terms of how can companies become involved in impact. And I think Comportamos is also in a privileged position to support these companies in that journey, given all of the experience that we have. So I think we have amazing years in front of us. The level of energy in the organization is amazing. And I think the country needs it very significantly. So I think it's going to be a very interesting chapter, the one that is still to be written.
So, share a little. You are both great allies that are part of this Latam Impact movement in YPO. We're trying to grow this emerging movement within YPO, and Luis actually was part of very early discussions around impact in YPO. And Mauricio now is one of the Latam Impact champions within the Latam Impact movement. Share a little bit about how's the discussion around impact in the Colombia YPO chapter, and what the initiatives you're trying to do, and give it your spin. And
let me share with you, Paulo, a little bit of history. When you made reference to the early discussions, the one I took part of was in Los Angeles, LA, in 2001. And this was a GLC, or maybe it was 2002, but it was really early. And it was after the Beijing GLC that was canceled. So the next one in LA, and I guess, 9/11 influenced that discussion. The leadership of YPO International wanted to create a foundation. And in fact, they created a foundation that many of us do not know or do not remember. And it was called the Ray Hickok Foundation.
I did not know that. YPO is full of surprises.
It was a very interesting discussion because there were 3 schools of thought in those roundtables. There was the school of thought that still prevails in some members, that YPO should not get involved in impact. That YPO is, to enhance business, to make us better leaders and hopefully wealthier leaders. But impact is something that people can do on their own, and it's not part of the charter of YPO. There's the other extreme that, YPO International and chapters of YPO should each have a foundation. YPO Brazil, YPO Colombia, YPO International. And that since, we are so influential and we do so well, that foundations, will be funded generously, and they will take care of impact. That extreme, has fortunately faded, or to put it more bluntly, failed, because that's not the solution either. And there's a middle ground, which even in LA at that time surfaced, a little bit what Mauricio makes reference to, which is that YPO should help educate, should provide resources, should, even help create opportunities, but it's up to the members, their families and their young, to decide in what capacity they get involved. And that in part is because it's so difficult to choose a given, NGO within a chapter or a given cause. Someone wants education, another one wants to save the national parks. And if you do a survey, I don't know how big each chapter in Brazil is, but in Colombia, we have 170 members between YPO and YPO Gold. And we probably have no less than 300 NGOs somehow related to those 170 members, if you include spouses and so forth. So, what we think we must do is help our members to be more inspired, to be more motivated, to understand better the different ways of impacting with, the pros and the cons, because this is not all, perfect, and to, in some ways, facilitate that projects of impact happen, but more through a group than at a chapter level. If you create a group, eventually becomes a network within YPO, but a group would be big enough. So that's kind of our vision at this stage. And we'll see how we do, because we came last night from the strategic workshop, and it's very, very fresh in our minds.
Thank you for sharing that very interesting piece of history, and that, for our audience, that is exactly the vision around impact in YPO right now, in the Global Impact Council. And the way it's summarized is that I think impact for YPO is about two things. First of all, it's a massive opportunity to give a purpose to the organization, to YPO. We have 35,000 YPOers globally, 3,000 in Latin America. They are typically leading the most powerful organizations in Latin America. We're talking about 35,000 high net worth families that have, like you mentioned, financial power, YNGs, spouses that are willing to have an impact. If YPO can somehow be a learning mechanism for these entities that are connected to learn about how they can have impact, then you're talking about a real scalable and transformational impact that YPO can have, and that anyone willing to have an impact through YPO can use. And the other is to stay relevant. This impact trend is a trend that maybe your generation was the pioneer in starting to crazily think about that, but now it's becoming more and more mainstream. And we're starting to see more and more examples similar to Comportamos con Colombia. Many of these professional services firms now have structured volunteer programs globally that they mandate that their employees do something like that. So we as an organization have to start talking about that in a very unforced way, like you mentioned, and focused on learning, because this will also make us welcoming to this new generation of YPOers, not to mention YNGs, that they also want to be part of YPO, right? So thank you for sharing that. I think we can wrap up. Maybe one final comment from Mauricio and one final comment from Luis, and we wrap up this interview.
Mauricio.
Well, thanks, Paulo. Thanks for the time to share a little bit what we have been doing. I think this is a journey that is just beginning. I think when we sit and talk about the impact and how much it has motivated us in the past, and we put it in the context of the interest of YPO in impact and what we can collectively achieve together, I think the sky is the limit. And I see this also as an invitation to all the members to join up, and we'll travel this path jointly. We'll define what it's going to look like. The beauty of this is that it really depends on us, energy that we can put behind the effort. So thanks for the time, Paulo, and we look forward to continue collaborating on these efforts with you and the rest of the Latam team.
Thank you. Luis?
And I guess my closing remark is going to be more centered on dreams, because I still continue to dream. And there's two dreams in particular with respect to Compartamos. The first one is that the amount of knowledge and experience that has been accumulated over these 22 years really can be packaged and hopefully made virtual in the web, and allow NGOs around the world, not only in Colombia, to achieve capacity building to a significant percentage. They may not be able to reach the same level of excellence that we try to achieve in the mandates that we undertake, but the pathology of NGOs tend to be quite similar. And we believe, or at least I believe, that that knowledge and improvement can be massified through the internet. And the second dream is that we hope in some country in the world, hopefully in Latin America, someone can be a leader to take the Compartamos model and duplicate it in other countries. Half of the firms that are part of Compartamos have global operations, and it would be easy if such a leader existed to be able to create an entity like ours. So with that, Paulo, I thank you very much for the opportunity, and hope to see you in Costa Rica, if not sooner.
Thank you, Luis. So there's an idea and maybe a nudge to any YPO or YNG or even spouse that has listened and maybe got inspired by the story of Luis, Mauricio, and Compartamos con Colombia. If you want to replicate that in your country, call Luis, call Mauricio. They are willing to share free of charge everything that they've built in this amazing organization. And this will probably allow you to maybe replicate this amazing story and have massive impact as we saw today. Thank you, Luis, for such an inspiring work. Thank you for what you've done. As a Latin American, I am very proud to see that you exist and what you do and what you've done. You have been a true leader in this in the region. Mauricio, thank you for sharing of that dream and sharing your experience here as well. And thank you both for spending time here to share your story with fellow YPOers. I too dream now, Luis, that this is going to inspire a few people to maybe do something similar and grow this movement. Thank you very much.